How to install pickups in a Fender Telecaster, Broadcaster, or Nocaster guitar. Coming up. Okay, you guessed it. I'm going to show you how to install pickups in a Fender Telecaster, Fender Broadcaster, Fender Nocaster style guitar. Essentially the same process for all three of those. But I installed a set of unaged ThroBak T59 MXV pickups in my 1959 Jimmy Page Telecaster here. Actually, I already had a age set in the guitar, and the guitar is so pristine, I'd rather have unaged. So I switched them out again. They sound great. Previous sets sounded great, but anyway, I did a video of that. I'm going to show you and include all the little tips and tricks that you may or may not know that'll make sure you have an accurate, well done job that's done efficiently without any sort of hunting and pecking as to what to do. So in our effort to keep the ThroBak audience informed, I did this video. And stick around to the end. I'm going to give you my pickup height adjustment recommendations for the neck and bridge pickups. And also I'm going to give you my guitar string choice recommendations, what I prefer for a Telecaster style guitar, depending upon the style of pickups that are going in the guitar. So I've got a preference on that, and I might as well share it with you. Anyway, on to the video of installing pickups in a Fender Telecaster guitar. Okay, let's change the pickups in this Telecaster. Obviously, these instructions will work for just about any style Telecaster or Broadcaster. So let's start by taking the strings off, and then we'll get on to undoing the connections here under the control plate. Okay, let me go through a quick list of what we're going to use here. First, you need a soldering iron. This is a 60-watt soldering iron. Suggest you have at least 60 watts. We also have small Phillips screwdriver, and you might, depending upon what your pick guard is, you might need a small flathead screwdriver, some fine needle nose pliers, and some fine wire cutters. Of course, some solder, and I'm going to use a little sort of self-powered driver here to speed it up. And also you'll need a larger Phillips head screwdriver for the bridge plate screws. One other thing too is it's always good to have a notepad and a pencil and a small, I like to use a small millimeter ruler to measure things like pickup height, and also we'll probably have to scoot the saddle to get the screws out. So if you do a little quick measurement first, you can get it back into the ballpark. Okay, so let's start with removing the control cavity plate here. You know what, let's take the pick guard off also. That's got to come off. Might as well do it now. All right, let's get our microfiber cloth here and use this as a way to protect the finish from scratching and also solder. Okay, so before we do anything else, let's take a picture of the wiring. It's always good to do that in case you wanted to put it back. Of course, pickups come with a wiring chart, but you know, you want to know how it went together originally in case you want to go back. So what we're going to start with here is these two black wires are the ground wires for both the bridge and neck pickups. Let's undo those, and then we'll also take care of removing the wire for the bridge pickup and the wire for the neck pickup. The bridge pickup hot wire is supposed to be yellow, and the neck pickup hot wire is supposed to be white. The bridge pickup in a sort of a 60s era pickup, the ground wire for that can be blue, but anyway, these are both black as per the 50s era. Okay, let's start with this ground wire. And for a large solder spot like that, you're going to want to have a wider screwdriver tip, at least, for your soldering iron. That'll allow you to get enough heat on that quickly to release that solder joint. And again, with anything soldering, you want to clean the tip first, then you want to tin it so that you have some fresh solder on the tip to transfer the heat. So there we go. Just leave the rest of that excess solder on there. Now usually these are twisted together, so just a little bit twist there. Separate those so that they can be pulled out of the guitar without a problem. Again, these are both of the ground wires. One's for the bridge, one's for the neck pickup. Now we're going to undo the connections here for the switch for the bridge and hot wires. Or sorry, bridge and neck pickup hot wires. All right, so that's as simple as that. Now you still have the ground wire here for the jack, so that's got to stay attached to the guitar. All right, so the next step is we've got to pull the pickups out. Again, you can see here the white and black wires there are for the neck pickup. We're going to take the plate off here by loosening these removing those 4 screws, and we'll have access to removing the bridge pickup. So let's start with the neck pickup. That's a quick one to do. Now, before we remove this, my suggestion is take your small ruler and carefully measure from the bottom of your pickup cavity to the top of the cover. That way, especially if you have this vintage arrangement for the height adjustment mounting screws, you can adjust it at least to where the previous pickup was, before you get it all strung up and get it in the guitar, get the pick guard back on the guitar. So let's do that. I'm going to just carefully measure without hooking any. Do it on the back side of this cover too. This is where the connections are for the pickup, and it would be possible that you could cut some magnet wire on that side. So let's just take a measurement to the top of the cover for the high and low E sides. Okay, so measurements were 23 millimeters for the high and low E to the bottom of that pickup cavity. This is going to vary depending upon your guitar, because the neck set angle may be a little different. All right, let's remove the Phillips screws here. There's 2 Phillips wood screws that hold the neck pickup in. Let's just take those out. Okay, and with it came these surgical tubing springs and screws. We'll probably reuse these. Our pickups come with it, but generally I like to reuse the parts as long as they're the correct parts when reinstalling pickups, just because that's what the guitar came with, and the threads too are already cut for these screws. So in case there was any variation, we wouldn't run into any problem. Okay, as with the neck pickup, let's measure here from the top of the bridge plate to the top of the high and low E flanges of the pickup, just so we've got a starting point. The final adjustment we'll do, and I'll give you measurements for the top of the high and low E magnets, my final adjustments, and I'll do that after we get everything in the guitar. But as sort of a way to get a starting point, let's measure the top here of the pickup to the base, the bridge plate. Okay, so we had the high E was 5 millimeters and the low E was 4 millimeters. Whether or not that applies to your guitar, don't know. Now let's, I've got to move this saddle at least, so I'm going to measure the distance here from the back of the saddle to the edge of the inside of the bridge plate so that I can get it back to the right spot once I put the mounting plate back in. All right, let's take these out. I'm going to try with this smaller screwdriver. Usually these are not in here super tight. You don't want them super tight because you then run the risk of cracking the finish, denting the top if you have a very light guitar or very soft wood. So generally snug, but not super tight. So this smaller screwdriver will be plenty. I also like to put them aside in the order that they come out of the guitar, particularly with something like a bridge like this, so I can put them back in the same order. In theory, it shouldn't make any difference, but just in case there's a little variation in the screws and how they seat, we're all set with them being the way they were before they were taken out of the guitar. And again, got another towel here. Let's protect the finish. And probably don't really need it, but might as well be safe. Okay, so what we're going to do here is let's remove. All you got to do is loosen the Phillips head screws here so that the pickup is no longer attached to the plate. Right. So let's remove that pickup. Now, so here's our ThroBak pickups, and take a look what we've got in here. Got some extras, wiring diagram, our authentication card, and the pickups. Now we do have our own pickup mounting screws and surgical tubing, and as well for the bridge and neck pickups. Bridge here, neck pickups here. But again, these are the right things, right ones, but for the bridge in particular, if the tubing is good and the screws are what you want, leave the original on there, because it can often be a pain just to wrestle these bits of surgical tubing off and back on. So I'm just going to leave those on there. I know they work. And we will put the new pickup on here. Again, the bridge has the black and yellow wire. Blue and yellow if it's one of our 60s era Fender Telecaster pickups, bridge pickups. You just line up the 3 screws there. So these screws are actually threaded into the copper plate that is on the back of the pickup. If it's one of our Alnico 3 Broadcaster or Nocaster bridge pickups, that'll be a tinned steel plate, but this is correct for the era. It's a copper plated steel base plate rather than tinned. Okay, we're going to tighten these. Let's get that rough measurement back. And to the concept with these is you've got 3 screws. It's a little bit of a balancing act, but you'll do the fine adjustment when you get the strings on. But the general idea is that you want this pickup to kind of lean parallel to the strings. And you can accomplish that by adjusting this to adjust the angle, to keep it parallel to the strings, and then these two to adjust the high and low E height of the pickup. Okay, let's fish this bridge pickup wire through, and we'll get the bridge plate attached back to the guitar. All right, put them back in the order they were taken out. And of course, with any screw like this, make sure you're feeling whether or not it is following the previous threads. If it's hard to screw this back in, stop, back it out, and thread them in by hand first with your fingers so you know you're getting them into the old threads that the screws previously cut into the wood. Okay, so right now that it's still loose on there, I'm going to screw these down so they're just, feel a little resistance with the top to seat this. It's not really tightly on there yet. I'm just going to loosen the middle too. Let's tighten. The outer two screws. Then we'll do the middle two. Okay, don't think you need more than that. It's on there tight, but not really tight. Let's put those saddles back to where they were. Okay, we've got that back to our original measurements. Now, one thing I'm going to do right now is this truss rod needs just a little bit of tightening, which I'm going to do now before I put the new pickup back in here. So I'm going to get a little bit there. All right, so let's put our T59 neck pickup in. And I'm going to reuse that. Their little springs there, they're nice and thick, so I don't think that's an issue. For mounting the pickup to the body, this is the Fender style where or the vintage style where you actually mount the pickup to the body with these small wood screws. And but this will work with a pickguard mounted arrangement where the height adjustment screws are attached to the pickguard. Those will thread, you can just carefully thread them into these holes. These are just the right size for the screws to cut their own threads if you have that style of mounting system for the neck pickup of your Telecaster. But this one goes right to the body. This is vulcanized fiberboard, and a small screw will thread into this, and it'll be a secure mounting arrangement. You'll just need to reuse the springs that come with your pickups, or use the surgical tubing springs that we provide. But again, we provide the tubes and the wood screws for the vintage style mounting. But this will work with a pickguard mounted neck pickup. Okay, I'm gonna put these screws into the pickup. Let's first fish this wire through here. And this can be a little tricky sometimes. Might have to tape them together, but let's see if we can do it without doing that. This is one spot where little needle nose pliers can come in handy to fish stuff through this hole. All right. Got them into the control cavity. Oop. We're just going to line those holes up. Let's do one side at a time with the holes that are already in the body of the guitar. And again, just like the bridge, you know, shouldn't take a lot of force. Those screws should find their old threads in the body of the guitar. So if you've got a lot of force required to get that in there, then you know something's a little off. You want to back it out, start over. All right, I'm going to take my measurement here, and that we took before we took the old pickups out, and I'll adjust the neck pickup to that height. Okay, so we're ready to hook the solder connections back to the guitar wiring. Before we do that too, let me just kind of explain a little bit about the phase of the pickups. We sell these individually, but we really recommend people buy them as a pair. Fender has never been very consistent about the phase relationship of standard, at least, let's say, for their neck and bridge pickups in a Telecaster. So these are vintage phase south up, and we recommend vintage phase for anybody that might have a Telecaster where they want to mix it with a humbucker in the neck position. But essentially, this whole phase issue has to do with winding direction and magnet charge. The risk of putting our bridge pickup in with any other, or neck pickup in with any other pickup, is that they may be out of phase in the middle position. There's really no way for us to know exactly what you've got without having the pickups in hand. So we really recommend you get them as a pair, and just be aware that there's this possible phase issue if you don't. Okay, let's get to the pickup wiring here to the control cavity wiring assembly. So we've got our ground wires here, and with a Telecaster like this, you want to have some excess wire within the control cavity so that everything can go in and come out without being bound up with wires that are too short. Since these two wires have to go together, these ground wires, I'm going to cut this one to match, this is the bridge ground wire, I'm going to cut it to match the neck pickup ground wire so that those will go together a little easier. They have to be twisted just a little bit in order to solder to the back of the pot here. Now again, this is pushback wire, so it doesn't require stripping any wire. It just requires pushing the fabric shield or insulation back, and then you expose the center conductor. Also, a trick to doing this, you pull it out, get it the length you want, pinch that fabric insulation. It's usually got a little, it's kind of lightly waxed, I think, when they manufacture it, and that'll let it hold its place, that insulation, without scooting back up. So we got those. Let's just twist them together ever so slightly. And I'm going to tin this first, the actual two wires that go together. Again, you clean your tip, and then, but let's tin those two wires together. And we've already got some solder on there. So I'm going to tin the tip of this soldering iron, reflow that, press it together, and just hold it. Let's put a little angle on that so I can press it down a little easier. And let's hope that gets us some good contact. With this, I want to make sure I got good solder on the tip there. Okay, I think we're good. And again, that's the key to having a soldering iron that has got enough wattage and a wide enough tip. If it were too low wattage, too small a tip, you would not heat up that solder quick enough. And the effect would be you'd actually heat up the back of the pot too much, and then you run the risk of damaging the internals of the pot. All right, so we've got the neck pickup goes to that terminal right there, and the bridge pickup goes to that terminal. Let's do those connections. Now, there's one thing I'm going to do here. Did not mention this tool. This is manual solder sucker. I'm going to suck the old solder out of that so we can pass the wire through. Now, you don't really have to do this. You could just heat it up and heat that terminal up quickly and pass the wire through, and you'd be good, but it might be a little tricky. Now, this can be accomplished too with a solder braid or desoldering braid that will wick up the solder. But if you have one of these are cheap. There's knockoffs. This is a Soldapult. I think this is kind of the original ones of these, but you can find them on Amazon. Cheap, very cheap. Takes a little bit of practice using it, but it gets the job done quickly without overheating it when you have a little practice with it. Oh, that one needs a little bit more. I think I need to, if you can't clear the hole out, you actually, if you put just a little more fresh solder on it, it gives it a little bit, flows a little bit better when you try to do this. There we go. All right, let's get our neck pickup wire over here, and I'm just going to leave that the full length so we can just get that back in the guitar. But maybe I'm going to trim the bridge wire. All right, let's put a little bend on that. Fish it through from the bottom. And you don't really need that. You don't really need that crimped on there, because for whatever reason this thing may need to come out of the guitar at some point. And you want a job that's easier for the next guy. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put a little solder on there and then reflow it. Well, let's put the solder on here first. Then I'm going to reflow it, putting a little pressure against that lug or terminal. And then we've got mechanical contact as the solder dries. But if we ever need to remove that, it'll come out quickly. Let's do the same thing for the bridge pickup wire. Let's put a little more solder on there. Okay. Okay, let's fold these wires neatly back into the control cavity here. And we'll put everything back together and put the screws on the control plate here. Let's set our pick guard on here. And I like to just set that on and make sure that our cover or the pickup itself is not tipping one way or the other. Sometimes this is lined up well. I think, but sometimes these can, depending upon where those screws were drilled, the holes for them were drilled, you might have a little lean one way or the other, and you can tweak that with a screwdriver to kind of bend the screws just a little bit if needed. This one doesn't look like it needs it. Typically you don't need to do that, but if you do, that's kind of an easy way to correct any lean that might be there if it's mounted into the body like this and the holes weren't put quite on target to begin with. Okay, I'm going to leave this pick guard off. We know it lines up right. I'm going to put the strings on because we can put this pick guard back on by fishing it under the strings after we have our pickup height adjusted. And that for a vintage style like this, you have to have access to it underneath the pick guard to adjust the height of the neck pickup. So I'm going to string it back up and I will do the height adjustment and I will give you the measurements for that, along with my recommendation for strings for different types of Telecasters and broadcasters. Okay, I hope you found that helpful. How to install pickups in a Telecaster guitar. And the pickups are in here. They sound good. Okay, that was it. I told you I'd tell you how to stick around. I'd tell you my pickup height adjustment recommendations, and I'm pretty consistent with a Telecaster, broadcaster, Nocaster style guitar as to what I'm going to adjust these pickups to. Might be a little bit of variation, like a 0.5 millimeter for me, depending upon what the guitar needs, but I'd say 90% of my guitars that are a Telecaster style are going to end up with these numbers. So just a rundown of how I measure these. I set up all my guitars with a 2 millimeter action as measured from the 12th fret, not capoed at all, so unfretted, from the top of the fret at the 12th fret to the bottom of the string for both a high and low E. And that number is 2 millimeters. Personally, I prefer millimeters, find it easier to read, and that's how I provide these numbers. But so we're starting with that 2 millimeter action at the 12th fret, unfretted. And then for the neck and bridge pickups, these measurements are from the top of the cover or the top of the rod magnet to the bottom of the string for the high and low E. So those numbers are, and again, I'm pretty consistent with these guitars as to how to adjust these. For the neck pickup, the high E, 3.5 millimeters, low E, 4 millimeters. Maybe you can get a little closer on the low E side, especially if you have something like an Alnico 3 rather than an Alnico 5 pickup. And for the bridge pickup, 2.5 millimeters on the high E and 3 millimeters for the low E. Generally, lower opens up the tone, higher increases the output. But this is what I like. I don't think it's too far off of what Fender generally adjusts these for, but this is what I prefer. Okay, I was also going to give you my guitar string recommendation. Okay, generally if we're talking about a Alnico 5 style pickup in a Telecaster or even a Stratocaster, I am going to prefer a pure nickel string. And the reason for that is Alnico 5 is fairly magnetically active, and pure nickel wound strings don't produce quite the amount of signal as a nickel-plated steel, or the code in the guitar string industry is nickel wound string, for on those wound strings compared to a pure nickel. That little slight reduction in signal on the wound strings with a Telecaster or even the Stratocaster, if we're talking an Alnico 5 pickup, you get a little bit more headroom. It balances the low and the high a little better to my ear, and it's also kind of the classic traditional set of strings that would have been on a vintage Telecaster. And to me, it gives that classic tone. So if we're talking about our strings, that would generally be what I'm going to choose, is going to be our pure nickel hex core 10 to 46 strings. And the hex core is just a little snappier than the round core. A lot of people like the round core here, but I kind of like the slightly increased amount of snap on the wound strings that you get with the hex core. But if you want a little more chunky tone, the round core is also a great choice. Remember, with the round core, you have to trim these properly when you install them in order to avoid the wraps from getting loose. I've got a video on that, so make sure to check that out. Now, so the exception to this pure nickel preference of mine for a Telecaster has to do with if we're talking about a Alnico 3 style pickup. Alnico 3, and generally that would be a vintage spec broadcaster pickup, a vintage spec Nocaster pickup, a 51 era pickup. All of these sets, all of these pickups, if the manufacturer is making them according to vintage specs, those will have Alnico 3 magnets. Alnico 3 magnets have about half the magnetic pole, maybe almost half the magnetic pole of a Alnico 5 magnet pickup, Telecaster style pickup. And that extra, or that lower magnetic force of the Alnico 3 magnets actually benefits from having, I think, from having a wound string that is nickel-plated steel. And with those, I think it balances out the output and the tone of the low and high compared to pure nickel. So my preference with those Alnico 3 style pickups would be a nickel-plated steel or nickel wound string. So our hex core version is our nickel wound hex core string. And whatever strings you're shopping for, if it says nickel wound, that's code for nickel-plated steel. Rather, if it's pure nickel, it's going to say pure nickel. And we have these also in a round core version right here. And generally too, so if you're looking at other brands, D'Addario is going to be nickel-plated steel hex core. Like a GHS Boomer, that's a round core nickel-plated steel. A lot fewer choices with pure nickel, but anyway, that's my recommendation with that. And also too, if you have like a 1954 Stratocaster style guitar pickup, those are supposed to be Alnico 3 also. So that'd be another guitar or style of pickups to try the nickel-plated steel rather than the pure nickel with. Okay, I hope all that was helpful. Thanks for watching. If you found that informative, click like, subscribe. We always like that. And once again, thanks for letting ThroBak be part of your search for great guitar tone.